For the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about Operation Scale Supply, and my last two updates have been about the opportunity to get the New York Times on board with removals and decarbonization. So this last week, I got an email from a reader that said, I think the New York Times has very little influence on this issue. Why do you want to make your case to them? So I want to talk about what's possible when we get the New York Times on board. Right now what we have is the New York Times reporting about decarbonization alone being enough. The conversation with investors, climate leaders, policymakers is stuck on the sidelines about whether removals are really needed right now. At the same time, we have the consensus of hundreds of climate scientists with the IPCC that have made the clear call that we need removals in addition to decarbonization right now. We have startup companies that have heard that call and are building solutions, but they're not getting the funding that they need. So what will happen is we're going to continue to have more articles like this, investors just investing in decarbonization, and startups in carbon removal that don't get the investment they need and drop out. We're going to lose the ability to hit climate targets for 2030 and beyond that require removals plus decarbonization. So what's possible is we get the New York Times on board. We connect to investors, corporate leaders, policymakers all at once. Imagine the investors who are going to read this article and they're like, wow, it turns out there is this whole other area of the climate solution that I can be investing in addition to the investments I'm already making in decarbonization. This is something where I can get in on the ground floor of a crucial piece of the climate puzzle. So you can see this unlocking a whole new wave of carbon removal investment. At the same time, imagine the heads of large corporations, people who are leading in sustainability within corporations, are going to be reading this and saying, look, this is something I thought decarbonization alone was enough, but it turns out we really do need these removals, and that unlocks a whole new wave of buyers. There's policymakers and people who are voting for policies that are also reading this kind of coverage and saying, look, let's get on board with this. We need to support carbon removal long term, and that unleashes, in addition to the investment that's going to happen and the buying that's going to happen, policies to support carbon removal. All of this becomes possible with the New York Times on board with decarbonization plus removals. We can have this whole new wave of investors and policymakers and public support and corporate buyers. That's what's possible. So this week I connected with Jack Sullivan, who's a longtime member of the AirMiners community, and Jack is partnering with me and taking the lead on getting the New York Times on board with decarbonization plus removals. So I want to invite you to join us in having the New York Times on board. Hit reply to get connected.